will be posted on YouTube for later viewing. Now, I will begin reading our land acknowledgement. Friends of the Forest Preserves acknowledges that the Forest Preserves in Cook County are located on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, a long-standing Anishinaabe alliance of the Ojibwe or Chippewa, Ottawa or Ottawa, and Potawatomi North American Native tribes. These lands have also been home and a place of trade for many other tribes, including the Fox, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Meskwaki, Miami, and Sauk people. For centuries, these Native Americans cared for and protected these lands until ownership was largely stolen from them by US colonizers. Today, we employ certain land management techniques that follow Indigenous practices. However, our forest preserves and our communities would greatly benefit from more intentional application of Indigenous knowledge in how we manage and honor our protected areas. Chicagoland is home to one of the largest and most diverse urban Native American communities in the United States. Community members celebrate, practice, and adapt their heritage and traditions within our modern urban environment. It is our responsibility to find a common cause with community members and support their engagement with the forest preserves. We ask you to offer gratitude, respect, and support to the many Native American people, including their ancestors, who consider the lands and water within Cook County to be sacred. And please join us in carrying on a legacy of respect and active caretaking of our earth for us and future generations. If you want to know what Friends is committed to doing or would like to learn more, please visit our website. I will now mute myself and hand it over to Peter Whitney, Spring Creek and Senior Field Organizer at Friends of the Forest Preserves. Enjoy.
All right, thank you so much, Maya. Derek, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And welcome everyone, and thank you so much for coming to tonight's webinar, The Hidden Life of the Forest Preserves, the Wonderful World of Seeds. My name is Peter Whitney. I'm the Spring Creek Field Organizer here with the Friends of the Forest Preserves, and Derek, you can go to the next slide. As a field organizer, I work to support volunteer-led ecological restoration initiatives across the forest preserves of Cook County. And I'm really excited to join you all tonight, really excited and thankful that you're joining, and kind of humbled just to be able to share this opportunity with everyone. So thank you so much. A little bit about me. From a really young age, I was fascinated and just drawn to the natural world here in Chicago. I grew up in Lake County, and spent as much time as I could outdoors. And it wasn't until I was in high school that I was introduced to this concept of restoration ecology, or participating more directly in the land. I was a high school volunteer and then later got an internship with the land restoration nonprofit, and I kind of haven't looked back since. I've always tried to spend as much time as I could outdoors, but it wasn't until I was able to participate in restoration that my eyes got open to this sort of new way to observe, to participate in the nature all around me. And you know, you can only spend so much time out hiking, you can only spend so much time out walking in the preserves, and restoration and volunteering in the community you get connected with just gave me a reason to come back and learn something new every time, and has really enriched my practice of being in nature so much more than it would if it was just me on my own. So I'm going to share a little bit about this world of the natural world around, some of the hidden worlds, and focus in on the hidden world of seeds that we can find in the forest preserves of Cook County. We're going to go on a little bit of a journey together, so I hope everybody will stick with me. We're going to start with just getting a little context of where we are in the Cook County Forest Preserves, a little bit of technical information about seeds, a little bit, we're going to take a step back and absorb the perspective of a seed in northeastern Illinois on today, April 1st. April Fool's Days, by the way. I don't have any good jokes planned for the presentation. And then we're going to think about seeing the world through seeds, and hopefully find our place among them. And it's kind of covered up in this picture here, but that's kind of why I wanted to start with this view of volunteers in the foreground kind of recessing out into the background and disappearing in the tall grass. I think a big part of the hidden world of the forest preserves is finding our place in it. And I hope we can kind of explore that perspective together tonight. Derek, can you go to the next slide? A few reminders before we get into tonight's presentation. As far as natural resources are concerned, everything in the forest preserve is protected and part of the land management agency, and that includes, and perhaps especially so, refers to seeds. So learning about and appreciating seeds is really for everyone, but the actual process of collecting seeds and dispersing them in the forest preserves is carefully guided by trained ecologists with the forest preserves of Cook County. Those ecologists make careful recommendations about the who, what, when, why, and where of native seeds when it comes down to the native ecosystems in the Cook County Forest Preserves. So they have a few guiding documents that are available to the public if you're interested to learn more. But I just wanted to make it clear that learning about seeds is open to everyone, but kind of participating in the process is something that you do need permission to do, but I would highly recommend it. And it's not a hard barrier. It's something for everyone to take part in. If you want to dive a little bit deeper, the Forest Preserves of Cook County has a publicly available seed policy that kind of gives you a good introduction to where seeds are coming from, how far they're traveling in Cook County. Part of it gets kind of technical, but part of it also is great for someone who's new to seeds. So it's definitely something I'd recommend as a read. Then they do also split up the forest preserves, including your favorite forest preserve site, into something they call management schedules. So these are kind of manageable, smaller chunks of forest preserve divided up by ecosystem that inform volunteers and land managers in the Forest Preserve of Cook County about what to do where. So if you are going out to collect with a volunteer group, we're going to make sure that we collect ethically and sustainably. We're not going to spend too much time necessarily on the techniques of collecting tonight, but we will touch on it in a couple different sections. And generally, a lot of us are pretty new to collecting seeds, and so we want to make sure we leave as much as possible in the wild populations to disperse in a natural setting. We do our best, and as you'll learn about all the unique seeds tonight, we have a role in spreading seeds and in supporting the ecosystem, but nature will do best in a lot of cases, and so making sure that that wild population is there to continue to sustain itself. As for tonight's presentation, I'm kind of going to be, the only perspective I have is my own, so I'm going to be sharing tonight as a native seed and plant enthusiast. Part of the amazing thing about these hidden worlds is that they are so specific, all the interrelationships between species in the natural world, and the connections that you can find, that you can see, that you can find described among species in the natural world are just about endless. And you'll find that the closer you look and the more that you learn, the more you'll start to recognize gaps in our collective knowledge. So after falling in love with restoration ecology at a young age, I went to school and I studied environmental science and horticulture. And at the time, and I still do think it was kind of like the best introduction to plants and a comprehensive knowledge of ecosystems. But every single time I go out with volunteers and every time I go to a work day, I learn several completely new things to me, and I always leave with a lot more questions than I have answers. So ecology is a relatively young field, and there's really room for everyone. So any of you in the audience tonight could give attention to some small process happening in the natural world. Maybe it's specific to seeds, discover something completely new, or something that just hasn't had the spotlight of traditional knowledge. And part of learning about the natural world is opening yourself up and opening others up to the rhythms and the mysteries of these hidden worlds in the forest preserves. And seeds are just one unique language that kind of express the same common themes that are found throughout nature. So there's opportunity for anyone to be an expert, to provide some new knowledge, and to really, you could be leading this presentation pretty soon yourself. So all that's to say that I definitely don't know it all. The more I learn, the more I recognize how little I actually do know. My experience with seeds and my bias towards the natural world, of course, is very human-centric. So that's going to give a little bit of a flavor to tonight's presentation, and I hope I'll be able to guide you all through that as well. So next slide, Maya mentioned, but I work for the Friends of the Forest Preserves. Friends is an independent nonprofit organization, and our goal is to unite people around the forest preserves in Cook County to protect, promote, and care for them. To situate, Derek, you can go to the next slide, to situate ourselves in the forest preserves of Cook County. As a Spring Creek field organizer, I spend most of my time in that red circle in the northwest part of Cook County. But the forest preserves are really just this amazing natural and cultural resource for everyone in Chicagoland. They're the oldest and largest county forest preserve in the country. As far as land area goes, the green space you see on that map is about 11% of the county. And it exists to protect the cultural and natural resources of Illinois and give us a glimpse into the past and into the future of what the natural ecosystems in Illinois, these 70,000 acres, represent to Chicagoland. So really just a special resource and something that we have all in common. Okay, so that's where we're at. We can go to the next slide. Without further ado, I'm going to start off with kind of our sciencey portion of the evening. When I think about plants, I think it's really useful to kind of take a step back and think holistically and think about their development over the course of the year. So basically, the reproductive life of a plant can be described in these stages. Click 1, the flowering stage. Derek's helping me with the slides tonight, so apologize for any miscommunications here. Stage 2, over after the plant has flowered, it in turn attracts pollinators. And then stage 3, after the pollinators have visited, the resulting fertilization and the production of seed. This is a definite oversimplification of the life cycle of a plant, and each of these stages in the plant's lifestyle and the plant's life cycle deserve their own hidden life expose and presentation and deserve your attention. But tonight we're going to focus in on this last stage, fertilization and the production of seed. It happens at different times of year. It happens pretty soon in the calendar year. It happens at different times for different plants depending on what you're looking at. But generally, it's the culmination of the reproductive cycle. And a lot of times for most of the plants that we're looking at, it's kind of as they're preparing to go dormant for the winter season to come. So the next slide, you can click twice. This is kind of an informal poll to test some folks' knowledge in the audience. So we're going to start. For anyone who's joining on the phone, we've got a strawberry. Derek, if you click again, you'll see an acorn. And then if you click 3 times, there'll be 3 arrows. So in the chat box, I want everyone to say what they're looking at for 1, 2, and 3. Are they looking at a fruit? Are they looking at a seed? Is it neither? Is it both? I'll give folks a couple seconds to respond with your best guesses, or maybe you already know. I'm seeing some seed, both, fruit. What's a seed? Strawberry. Answers all over the board. Give another couple seconds for them to come in. Thanks for everyone's participation. Okay, lots of answers coming in. Derek, you can click again to reveal the answers. It was a little bit of a trick, but I just kind of wanted to introduce this concept to help us differentiate between fruits and seeds, and also decide where that's really a useful difference, or where we can just kind of use the same common term. So a strawberry in total is not actually a fruit. It's kind of what's known as a false fruit. What we eat is the fleshy fruit receptacle that just so happens to be delicious. The thing that I always thought were the strawberry seeds are actually single-seeded fruit. So those small brown structures are actually a fruit in and of themselves, and the seed is located inside, similar to an acorn. Acorn's a little bit different. It's a nut, but it is also a single-seeded fruit. So the point is that fruit and seeds, the main difference really is that where they're located inside of a fertilized flower, the ovule of the flower becomes the seed, whereas the ovary becomes the fruit. But for the purposes of tonight's presentation, there's a lot of different kinds of fruits that contain seeds in different ways. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's really not. Sometimes you can go on and debate with botanists for hours to figure out which is which. So for our purposes tonight, I'll kind of be referring to everything as a seed, even though oftentimes it might actually be a fruit. But the fruit, it's important to know, like in the strawberry and in the acorn example, the seed has all the basic essential nutrients for life, but the fruit around it has additional nutrients. Maybe it's attracting an animal that's going to eat the fruit. Maybe it's providing extra fertilizer for when the fruit hits the ground. It kind of has that extra purpose. And so we'll talk a little bit more about some of those extra purposes that go beyond the seed, but the seed is really the basic building block of a plant. Derek, you can go to the next slide. So speaking of seeds, we talked a little bit about fruit versus seed. Tonight, we're just kind of call everything seeds, even though some of them might be fruits. But we found out that the ovule of the flower is what becomes a seed, whereas the ovary surrounding it is what becomes the fruit. Another basic division we're going to talk about for seeds is that between a monocot and a dicot. The main difference between a monocot and a dicot is that a monocot contains a single cotyledon, and a cotyledon is an embryonic leaf found in the seed. Mono meaning one, cot short for cotyledon, and then dicot contains 2, di for 2 cotyledons in the dicot. It doesn't, on paper, it doesn't really seem like that important of a distinction, but Derek, if you click one more time, you should see a graph, and something that or maybe twice, something I think that's fascinating, and the reason I bring up monocots and dicots is that this small distinction between 1 leaf or 2 leaf can help you make a lot of inferences and a lot of guesses about what the plant is going to look like if you're walking around in the forest preserves right now in a woodland area, and you see one leaf versus two, and you can identify a monocot versus dicot, you can learn a lot about the plant and what it's going to look like in the middle of summer, what its leaves are going to look like, how many petals will be on its flower, what its root structures will look like, how the stem will be comprised. And that's one of my favorite things about plants is that there's all these recurring patterns that occur commonly between related species. And just based on this really simplistic difference between monocots and dicots, you can learn so much about the plant. Going back to monocots and dicots and just the basic anatomy of a seed, another thing we're going to talk a little bit about tonight is the seed coat. One analogy that I've heard before for seeds and that I like is that a seed is kind of like a packed lunch, and maybe the seed itself, a young student being sent off to school, where the young plant is sent off with all the energy that it needs to grow encapsulated in the seed. The protective layer or the seed coat is important, and it's what keeps the nutrients dry, keeps your lunch dry if you're walking in the rain. And then the lunch itself, the nutrients that are contained inside the seed is what's known as an endosperm. But between the endosperm and the protective layer around it and a few other things inside the seed, the young plant has everything that it needs to develop into a fully grown plant, to get its radicle, which is the first thing that emerges from the seed and becomes the root, and to develop its cotyledon, either a 1 or 2 cotyledon, depending on if it's a monocot or a dicot, and then in turn produce energy through photosynthesis and become the plants we all know and love. So right now is actually an excellent time of year to see this difference in person and to kind of see the earliest stages of seed structure. So Derek, if you click one slide over, you should have a familiar photo for anyone who's a gardener, that allium kind of shape of the flower. This is wild onion. And then click one more time, we can see an example of seed structures out in the forest preserves right now. So this is wild onion, and I can't say for sure, but I'm gonna go ahead and claim that I spread this seed last year. That's my hand, and we found this seed 2 weeks ago at a volunteer work day out in the northwest part of Cook County. And we found it in an area where we had spread seeds last summer. So I can't say for certain that it was my hand that gave it the magic touch to send it off towards life and gave it what it needed to send it on its way, but I'll go ahead and claim credit. Because one of the coolest things about spreading seeds is being able to come back and seeing those plants grow and knowing that you played a role in defining the ecosystem. But you can see really clearly here from the seed that's on the ground, that radicle is the first thing to come out of the seed. It kind of tethers the seed to the ground, provides it a little bit of structure, and then allows water to enter into the system. That also then sends the single leaf. In this case, you can't quite tell, but it is a single leaf. Wild onion is a monocot. So from the cotyledon is coming, there you go, thank you. So from the single seed is coming the leaf that will then in turn produce more leaves, produce energy for the plant, and develop into a fully grown allium. To see what it looked like last summer, Derek, you can click one more time. And this is the seed or the fruit in summer of the wild allium. So that's what it looked like when we collected it and when we spread it. And the picture in my hand is what you saw 2 weeks ago in the spring. So one quick reminder, looking at this photo, if anyone's getting into plant ID or learning about seeds and starting to see the world in seeds, you can really never take too many plant or seed photos. You never know if you might be giving this presentation in a year or two and you'll be frantically searching through your phone, trying to find close-ups of all the right seeds. I certainly was doing that and I didn't have them all. So a really fantastic resource that I'll link at the end of this presentation are the Lake County Forest Preserve seed guides. A big thank you to Kelly Schultz and Dale Shields. I'm using their photos. This photo is from that seed guide, so I use these to supplement a couple photos in the presentation tonight. And I do always indicate which one it came from. There's 12 guides in total. So if you do want to go back and look for more information about the seeds, for instance, this one came from the Woodland Forbes Field Guide. A great resource and definitely helped provide some supplementary photos for tonight's presentation. Okay, next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the diversity of seeds. So just as bright, attractive flowers have adapted to find and attract pollinators, but have the added benefit of being really attractive to the human eye, seeds have also developed into just a dazzling diversity of shapes, size, colors, and forms. Some are found in fluffy masses of hundreds of seeds at a time, like on the left side of your screen with showy goldenrod. Some are hidden in spots where you wouldn't quite expect, like in the compound flower of compass plant just below that with those white little tips. You can see the seeds just kind of poking out around the outside. Some are kind of creepy, like their names would suggest. I think the creepiest plant name out there is white baneberry or doll's eyes, which is that plant on the left center of the screen. Some are really stately and, in my opinion, even more beautiful or just as beautiful in seed as they are in flower, like that marsh blazing star or liatris. And then some really kind of hop in between extremes and can surprise you, like Ohio spiderwort on the right side of the screen. This plant is known for producing one really soft, delicate flower each day. As it finishes flowering, the sepals, which are those kind of green things behind the actual purple and cobalt petals of the flower, they enclose around that delicate flower, turn it into like a soup, and through some magical alchemy in the course of just about a week or a week and a half, it develops into these really like fossil-like stone hard seeds. So just an endless array of diversity, and this is just a few examples of how different seeds can look and how different they can play a role in the ecosystem, and how they can be just as beautiful as their flower counterparts. So next slide, and kind of leads us to ask ourselves, where does all this diversity come from? Each seed, like the flowering plant that produces it, has evolved and adapted to the conditions of Chicagoland. And today we're going to kind of take a look at the specific conditions of Chicagoland in early April. Some adaptations are well known, they're studied and can kind of be easily understood just by looking at the plant, and others are kind of still a mystery. There's all these things going on in the ecosystem, some more obvious and blatant like fire, some really less obvious and happening at the microscopic level in soils. But the basic cause for diversity is that seeds adapt in the face of what we call selective pressure. You can kind of think of the concept of survival of the fittest. Plants respond over time to challenges in different ways and adapt in the way that kind of gives them the best chance of surviving and thriving, or those that adapt to better succeed facing certain conditions will continue to reproduce and produce more offspring, and then slowly adapt towards that form. And the same happens in Illinois. So first in Northeast Illinois in April, we're going to be thinking about this kind of weather extreme, the transition between winter and spring. So from frozen winter days earlier this month to possibly coming again to bright sunny spring days, native plants have adapted to manage, and in fact oftentimes require, a period of dark and cold before they're triggered to sprout. That's what we call dormancy, that first bullet point there. Because weather is so unpredictable at this time of year, plants don't just rely on the weather to sprout. So another significant factor for a plant to germinate or to sprout is photoperiod, rather than just recognizing that it's warm out. We all know it could be warm and then freezing cold the next day. Plants actually respond to the amount of light present over the course of the day. So the term for that is photoperiod. How much light is present as we get later and later into the season. We have more consistent long days, and plants are actually looking for that cue in order to sprout and to germinate. Two terms that are kind of useful to know relative to that whole process. The first is stratification. That just kind of refers to the general range of natural conditions, like photoperiod, like temperature, like moisture in the soil, that seeds require before germination can occur. On the flip side, scarification is referring to the actual mechanism that breaks physical dormancy. So that is actually literally breaking that protective seed shell, kind of like the M&M shell around the candy. Like once it breaks, then the seed is able to germinate. Those physical mechanisms, I put it in this category because it could be weather, that freeze-thaw cycle in soils, going from really cold temperatures, freezing nights to warm days. That can break physical dormancy. But also other things like being burnt in a fire or being eaten by an animal. All of those things are different kinds of scarification. So as we continue into spring, this time of year, and even a little bit earlier, the snow melts away and last year's plant growth that's still on the ground kind of dries out, and all of a sudden fire becomes a significant contribution to the Illinois landscape. So native plant seed coats, again, that outer layer around the seed, they provide protection from the flames, and some plants, in fact, won't actually germinate until the seed has been burned. So fire burns away the leftover plant material, allowing more sunlight to hit the ground and release necessary nutrients into the soil. This is something, it's a challenge to overcome in Northeast Illinois in April, but it's also a natural part of the landscape. It can be triggered by like weather conditions, drier periods, and lightning, but the majority of our native plants have adapted in tandem with Native American burning practices. So Native American groups that were living in the area for tens of thousands of years used fire as a tool, and plants adapted and took advantage of that as well. So finally, region-specific adaptations. This is kind of a catch-all category for a lot of other things that are going on in the area this time of year. At a specific site, you know, there's differences in sun exposure, in the type of soil or the type of dirt that the plant is growing in microclimates, where that might make a forest preserve on the northern end totally different from what the forest preserve is like on the southern end. No two natural areas are really ever the same, and locally specific conditions really kind of dictate the interactions between plants and wildlife. So a lot of different wildlife, in particular insect pollinators, play a part in the spreading of seeds and the fertilization of seeds. And it really comes down to the specific region and even the context of the specific site. Some plants are just so closely timed to the insects that pollinate them that over time they've adapted to those really specific kind of natural occurrences in the area. But all of that kind of comes together and is driven by this force of selective pressure that is trying to result in, not trying, but is resulting in the seed that developing to spread in the way that'll give them the best chances of survival. So the question then is, how does the plant adapt to give itself the greatest odds of reproduction? And a facet of this hidden world, a kind of hidden world within the hidden world of seeds, is this hidden world of seed distribution. And in order to find the best possible conditions for growth, seeds adapt and plants adapt to produce seeds that are use different dispersal mechanisms or ways of spreading seeds. So some seeds are found in many seeds in a single berry, one single berry in a fruit, some or single seed in a fruit, some disperse in the wind, some float on the water, some just fall with gravity right below the parent plant below them. What I really like about seed dispersal, and the reason I kind of wanted to focus in on tonight, is that you don't have to be able to identify every structure or know every plant to be able to enjoy and think critically and understand what is going on, the underlying processes happening with the plant. You just can kind of see it firsthand. You can see it with your own eyes, and you don't have to know anything more than to just see the mechanism that you're seeing. As far as seed dispersal mechanisms, there's kind of two basic categories that we're going to explore tonight. The first is seeds that spread themselves. A term for that is autocory. So plants can use gravity, they can grow stems as far away from the parent plant as possible to deposit their seeds. Some even use trichomes or small hairs on the seed in combination with humidity in the air to literally allow seeds to walk away from the parent plant and plant themselves away. There's a whole fascinating world of different self-spread seed mechanisms and seed dispersal mechanisms. And then the other category, allocory, is for seeds that rely on external agents to spread the plant. So an external agent can really be anything outside of the plant itself. It can be the wind, it can be flowing water, it can be animals, it can be your dog, it can be your shoelaces, your pocket, the crevices in your car seat. Like if you fold up your pants or in between your socks, they can be there. If you spend enough time with seeds, they're going to find a way to use you and any kind of living animal to spread themselves. So allocory is anything that the plant relies or the seed relies on an outside source to spread. So we're going to explore some of my favorite forms of seed dispersal that we can find in the forest preserves of Cook County. Derek, you can go to the next slide. This is an example of allocory, or using other factors to spread seeds. And I wanted to share it first because it's one of the first dispersal mechanisms that we can find in the forest preserves each year. It's also a great example of how, if you look closer and closer at the natural processes happening underneath your nose, oftentimes you'll find the harder and harder it is to pronounce the processes that are happening. So forgive me if I get a little tongue-tied. I can't just quite get these two right as I try to explain the role of allosomes in myrmecochory, or the spread of seeds using ants, seed dispersal by ants. So allosomes are fleshy structures that are rich in lipids, and they're attached to the seeds of many plant species. And usually they're there for the express purpose of attracting ants. Basically, I think of them as like ant candy or ant ice cream that immediately is going to attract any ants in the area. But they just so happen to also be attached to some heavy and cumbersome seed candy wrappers. So ants are strong insects, they're motivated, they move quickly, so they're able to kind of quickly get seeds from any of these plants that produce allosomes on their seeds and carry them back to their compost pile, separating the allosome from the actual seed, throwing away the candy wrapper in a compost pile, which just so happens to give the seed kind of the perfect place for it to germinate. There's a lot of great examples of this seed dispersal strategy happening in the forest preserves in Cook County, especially among a group of wildflowers known as spring ephemerals, which are some of the first wildflowers. They're short-lived, they're mostly woodland species, and they're among the first to bloom in spring. So they're often kind of the first group of flowers folks are looking forward to. So that's why I put coming soon. It's one of the first seed dispersal mechanisms that you can really see in front of your eyes. Unfortunately, the seeds can, among some of the spring ephemerals, they produce seeds quite quickly. So it's not too far along from already being able to think about seeds and thinking about this happening in real time. So some of the groups that are listed, some of the plants that are listed there are among my favorites, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, and most of those are spring ephemerals, but I want to talk a little bit about bloodroot, which is one of my favorite spring ephemeral plants, and it also uses allosomes to spread seeds by ants. Derek, you can go to the next slide. So here's bloodroot here. I like to think of those two, if you can see the two leaves surrounding the stem, I kind of think of them as like a warm blanket or an embrace or a hug holding onto the stem and the flower of the plant as it blooms and bravely early in cold April days. But it's also a plant that happens to have a large and easy to see and apparently especially delicious allosome. So I can't blame the ants that come and quickly pick up the seeds as quickly they do, as they do. You'll find that seeds that produce allosomes and have ant dispersed seed dispersal mechanisms are pretty hard to collect the seed because you have to compete with ants and you have to try and outsmart ants, which doesn't sound like a hard task, but is actually pretty challenging. Derek, you can go to the next picture, which shows an ant kind of in action. I wanted to call out this article from Biodiverse Gardens, This Week in Anting. I'll put it at the end of the presentation, but anyone who's interested to kind of get an introduction to native ants and native allosome producing seeds, this is a really cool article with lots of different pictures of different species of ants interacting with different native seeds. So I'll share that at the end, but it's a great read. It's got lots of great photos. And as you might guess, the native ants are, of course, best adapted to carry and move the native seeds around. There's one more picture to show bloodroot seeds up close and see some of those allosomes in person and to kind of give you the relative size of those tiny, tiny little seeds. So they're definitely easy to miss. That allosome is one of the easier ones to see, but it's just these kind of fascinating, tiny, small, hyper-specific relationships that generally aren't that well known, but anyone who takes the time to know them and get to see them in the forest preserves can learn and see something totally new. So the next example we have is, you can go to the next slide, is another fun example of one of my favorite seed dispersal mechanism that I discovered at a young age. Just walking through the forest preserve along patches of jewelweed, and that is ballistic seed dispersal. There's an amazing array of structures and adaptations that allow plants to throw seeds as far away as they can. And I've got a quick video of that in action that you can play, courtesy of the Smithsonian.
Violet flower seeds are crammed into a special pod. As the pod dries out, the pressure is intense. Eventually, something's got to give. Touch-me-nots are even more highly sprung. The slightest contact triggers a chain reaction. Seeds light up the sky like a fireworks display. Another dramatic display comes from this unassuming looking plant, the squirting cucumber. It only takes a tiny vibration, and the cucumber starts a spectacular show. Seeds disappear into the distance like rockets. Spreading new plants in every direction.
Okay, you can go to the next slide. I will have everyone, I did just choose that video for the sound effects. I love the sound effects of that video just so much, but it does provide some great example of seed dispersal, and not all of those plants were native plants, but native plants that we have in the forest preserves of Cook County do use all of the seed mechanisms that were shown. Next one that I wanted to show, which I think is just one of the most beautiful examples of autocory or self-spreading seeds. Oops, Derek, you can go back one. At the bottom right, you can see an example of wild geranium here. We won't spend too much time on it, but basically it's these perfectly shaped, absolutely symmetrical ladles that develop all this turgor pressure as soon as you press them the wrong way. Once they're ripe, they're like a medieval catapult, and they send seeds flying far away from the parent plant, and then leave this kind of beautiful chandelier shape to last in the woodlands behind it. One more seed that I wanted to share in the next slide is one of my favorites, and it's one of the first grasses that we collect in the year each summer. It's an early summer, it's ripe, and that is porcupine grass. It's an example of a seed that kind of incorporates sort of the best of both worlds as far as seed dispersal goes. The beak of the seed is incredibly sharp. And Derek, you can click once to show the beak as a highlight. It kind of has a perfect little hook that can grab onto your jacket or your fur and go for a ride. Then as it falls, the beak itself is quite dense, so it always hits the ground first, kind of like a dart. And then the hook ensures that the seed is oriented correctly, and then it has a long awn, which Derek, if you click again, there's a highlight of the awn, which is that long part behind the seed head. And you can kind of see the difference between, if you look closely, between the light material and the dark material. And it's already, this seed in particular has already been separated from the main stalk, and so it's already starting to spin. Those two materials on the awn are made of a different composition. One dries out quicker than the other, so it's kind of like an auger where it spins and actually self-plants itself. They dry out at different rates, spins around in a circle, and plants the seed itself as it digs into the soil. So if you ever go out and collect this one, it's amazing how quickly it can happen. If you're not going to spread it right away, which I do recommend, because you kind of throw it like a javelin. If you want to save it for a little bit to move it to a different spot, you almost have to keep it in a cooler to prevent it from spinning and just creating an endless knot. Next slide. So now that we've taken some time to learn about the amazing diversity of native seeds, I want to take a step back, just kind of think about how these plants are reacting to changes in the modern world. Over the last 350 years or so, European settlers have really changed the way that humans in this area have interacted with ecosystems. And we've added a lot of new selective pressures on top of those selective pressures that we learned about earlier in spring. Things like habitat fragmentation, invasive species, a changing climate, constant disturbance pressure. All of those add and threaten a lot of the plants that have been adapted very specifically to the conditions of April 1st in Cook County, Illinois. Fortunately, here in Illinois, human involvement in natural ecosystems is definitely not a new thing. So we have radically changed the trajectory of our role in nature in the last 350 years. But humans have interacted with plants in Chicagoland for tens of thousands of years, contributing to the presence of fire, competition between species, supporting plants that benefit humans, adding pressure to those that don't. So all that's to say, it's not a new relationship, but it's kind of a new seed dispersal partnership, taking a more active role in seed dispersal, thinking about the world in seeds. To me, it kind of is a way to get to know native plants and their seeds as a process of renewing that relationship and thinking like a naturalist, seeing the world as a process happening around you rather than a final product, and kind of taking the time to know plants throughout the growing season, the seed season, and the dormant season. So to me, seeing seeds in Cook County means recognizing the cultural landscape that we're so lucky to live in and that we're so lucky to take a part in, and all the native plants that have adapted as a part of that as well. So this is where we come in And I've found getting to know native plants and native seeds is some of the most rewarding time that I've spent out in nature. I like to think of it kind of like going to a party. If I go to a party and I don't know a single person there, it's going to be a pretty intimidating experience and I'm not going to have a lot of fun. If I go to that same party and I know a couple people there, I know their names at least, I can say hello, then it becomes a little bit more fun. But then if I go there and I know everybody's name, and not only that, I know a little bit about them, I know about them in different stages of their life, all of a sudden I'm having a much better experience. And I think about spending time in nature in much the same way. The more you know the plants and animals and ecosystems around you, and if you can recognize them, especially in different stages of life, the more you're going to get out of the experience. And I'm going to make the assumption that everyone here in the audience tonight thinks it's at least worth taking a few minutes. You've already listened to me ramble for almost an hour on Zoom to get to know and better understand the natural world around you. So I think you'd get a lot out of the connection with seeds. Next slide. We've got a couple quick steps in the process of getting to know seeds in Cook County as a stewardship volunteer in the forest preserves. It looks a little bit something like this. As plants are growing, forest preserve volunteers spend a lot of time observing and scouting. You can click once, Derek. You note certain populations, learn where they are, what they like, what they dislike. You come back and visit them as they develop. If you're good enough to come back and find seed, that's a pretty huge accomplishment. It definitely doesn't always happen. But if you're careful enough with your observation, you're checking back in on these plants often enough, you can come back and actually find the seed once it's done reach the end of its growing stage. You can click again. If you're lucky enough to collect seed, then you can, and it's late enough in the year that you can dry store it, then we go into processing. So that's the process. Processing, or also sometimes called cleaning, where we separate the actual seed from the rest of the plant material. We usually call that chaff. So the pure seed being separated from the petals, from the leaves, from the stems that are left behind. Click once more. And then finally, at the end of the year's worth of effort, you get this really rich relationship with a single plant or a single population of plant over the whole course of the year. You get to spread it in the right habitats, bask in a year's worth of glory and a connection to nature, and then cross your fingers and hope you can come back next year and see that same plant that you just spread. And it's a big group here. You can see this is a group at Seed Dispersal or Seed Distribution Day at Spring Creek Forest Preserve. So it's not a process that you have to do alone, and it's not one that's intimidating. Joining a stewardship group gives you a glimpse into whatever the part of the process you're able to join, and I really think you'll get a lot out of it. If you click again, we're kind of going to take a quick walk through a year of seeds and just give you a glimpse of what you might experience if you're only able to come out for a certain time in the year. Early in the year, like before June, early summer, we're collecting seeds in the far left-hand corner of the screen. Before mid-June, there's just a few seeds that are getting to collect, just a few that are coming. This is volunteers collecting and spreading woolly grass, which is found in wetter soils, and the seed is like finer than dust, just this really tiny particulate that you have to spread right away. In the middle, come midsummer, there starts to be a little bit more abundance of seeds, usually just a few seeds producing species producing seeds at a time. Those can be stored for a short amount of time. Really, it's not until after July that you can start to dry store species and keep them on hand for a long time, let them dry out and go through the whole processing process. So after July, as fall arrives, you start to really experience like the autumn harvest bounty, and all of a sudden species are ripening all over around you. Seed collecting kind of turns into a competition to see how many different seed collecting bags you can carry at once and how many seeds you can find over the course of the day. And in the process, you find yourself reconnecting to the natural rhythms of the year in Cook County and late fall. When you used to be sad that all your favorite plants were disappearing, late fall kind of takes on this whole new level of meaning. And Derek can click to the next slide, which shows usually we'd be sad at home, missing all of our favorite wildflowers, but instead we're busy surrounding ourselves with the bounty of the harvest and all the native seeds that we've collected. This is some photos taken at Citizens for Conservation in the Barrington area, which is a nonprofit organization that works with Forest Preserve of Cook County volunteers. In 2020 alone, they collected 698 pounds of raw seed from 318 different species. And that is not the effort of any single individual. That's really the effort of a lot of folks contributing together, going through each of those stages of the process, scouting, keeping track of populations, teaching one another, learning, and then all contributing together for this general time of harvest. So if you go to the next slide, for me, seeing the world through seeds is also an opportunity to reconnect with the culture in cultural landscape. We live in a cultural landscape, and this is the opportunity to put ourselves back into it. Each season takes on a lot more meaning, and it gets all that much richer as you share it with volunteers. So here's a connection to a pastoral landscape painted in the mid 1500s, but for anyone who has volunteered with the Forest Preserve of Cook County in the fall, or for any of the Native peoples that have lived in Chicago for tens of thousands of years, this would be a familiar scene. And Derek, you can click through in the right-hand side where we have those neatly stacked piles of wheat. I see Ethan, who's a volunteer at Spring Creek or at Citizens for Conservation, proudly showing off his pile of seeds from last year. You can click to show that. And in the merry group of revelers, and the ones sleeping beneath the tree, I see a lot of volunteers sharing in the seed harvest process and the seed distribution process, and then sharing snacks over and enjoying a job well done over the course of the year. You can click Derek to show those pictures. I see someone comment that would be me sleeping, me too. And then you can click once more and just recognize this building, a famous painting by Winslow Homer of the veteran in a new field. And then I have Jim Root, one of the stewards at Spring Creek, restorationist in a new field. And so much of our culture and our experience of the world around us is based in the seasons. And ultimately that comes from this incredible production of seeds and food crops and really just the power of plants all around us. So I think volunteering in the preserves and taking care of nature is one of the best ways to reconnect that and just add that sense of value to each different changing of the seasons and all the plants that make it so special. So you can click again to the next slide. And I'm hoping by this point, I've convinced you to get to know your local seeds. I imagine you're ready to head out to the forest preserves and search for seed makers. We're calling them that now. We're not calling them plants anymore. They're just seed makers. That's their only purpose. And you don't have to wait until fall to start seeing seeds in the preserves. The first round of seeds kind of bursting into life can be found right now in the forest floors of the forest preserves of Cook County, like that picture I showed at the start of the preserve. As for hiking recommendations, I always look for undisturbed woodlands early in the year. I spend a lot of my time outdoors in the spring in undisturbed woodlands, looking for established canopies of trees, looking for those spring ephemerals and maybe the chance to see some ant melodrama happening down low in the soil. And then come May, I start looking for the nearest grassland or prairie near me and spending more time out in the open areas and seeing all the magic that's unfolding there. You can click over the next slide where I have a couple of resources. And I will send a follow-up email to everyone who's in the audience tonight with these specific resources. But as far as identifying seeds and getting to know them a little bit better, there's some really great Chicago Forest Preserve of Cook County specific guides out there through the Field Museum. Seed Heads of the Tallgrass Prairie is a good one. And then also those Lake County Forest Preserve seed guides that I mentioned. For looking up species quick, kind of online, I recommend Illinois Wildflower. It definitely doesn't have all of the plants out there that you might find, but it has good info. And I find generally it does include some information about identifying it over different courses of life stage and also recognizing seeds. So anywhere that recognizes seeds is good in my book. The Facebook group Illinois Botany is also a great resource for just seeing plants all over the state and kind of getting constant updates. A good overview of the seed processing process is a blog post by the prairie ecologist, Seeds of Promise. And then for anyone who's looking to dive deeper into ant dispersal, there's the Biodiverse Gardens article that I mentioned with the pictures of the ants. And then also In Defense of Plants is a great podcast. Episode 166 is all about ant dispersal. So Derek, you can go to the next slide. And that is it for me, the hidden life of the forest preserves, the wonderful world of seeds. Sorry for went a little bit over on time, but we've got a couple minutes left for questions. If you missed the two previous webinars, the world of fantastic fungi and the world of spaces to heal in the forest preserve, both of those are available on our YouTube channel. And then next week, join us for the hidden life of insects in the forest preserves with Maya, tonight's moderator host, the Popple Creek Prairie Stewards field organizer. Next slide has my contact information with my email and my phone and also the Friends website. So definitely, if we don't get to your question tonight, feel free to reach out to me, or if you put it in the Q&A box, I'll reach out to you directly as well. So thank you everyone so much. We got a couple minutes for Q&A, but I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank everyone for joining tonight. Hopefully you had fun along the journey and learned a thing or two along the way. and gained a new appreciation for seeds.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was really good. Left a smile on my face. So yeah, we do have about 5 minutes for questions. And so we'll get through as much as we can, as Peter said, and then he'll reach out to all of you with more resources and answers to your questions that we can't get to. So first question we have here is, which seeds in our region are the most difficult to collect, would you say?
Ooh, that is a tough one. Spring ephemerals are among the most difficult because you're competing against ants that are somehow way smarter than us and way quicker and better attuned to seeds becoming ripe. It's like amazing the extent that folks will go to collect seeds. So there's a process called bonneting where you can put a small mesh bag around some spring ephemerals, or like hoary puccoon is a prairie species that you use bonneting to try and collect the seeds, because some of them will be ripe in the course of hours and they'll drop so quickly. I don't know if I'd say any one specific plant is the hardest. Some are really hard to collect. Some are extremely hard then to take your collected seed and propagate. But spring ephemerals are a good go-to example of plants that are kind of hard to catch at the right time. And then you're also competing against wildlife to try and find the seeds.
Interesting. We had another question in the chat that asked, for seeds that need fire scarification, any idea on how long they can typically last in soil between fire?
Ooh, that's a great question. And it does depend quite a bit on the specific seed. So I couldn't give a specific year answer without knowing the plant, but it ranges. And it's pretty amazing the amount of time that seeds can survive in the soil, and especially, unfortunately, invasive plants. Like anyone who's dealt with any pretty serious invasive issues, that they'll persist in the soil for a long time. But it kind of depends on the specific species. But definitely they can make it a long time. They can make it years, and part of that is really the mystery of the seed itself. There's a lot of stories of folks, finding orchids as soon as they stop plowing their field and they're coming up, and they don't really know if that's from the seed bank or they're just blowing in from somewhere else. It's kind of your own research project that you can find out for each individual species.
Great. And we had another question that asked you to address tick concerns and any other things to maybe be aware of when we're out there.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I probably should have put that at the beginning. There's kind of like an email thread that goes around the volunteer group at Spring Creek, like who gets the first tick of the year. It's not like everybody gets a tick, but just like who spots the first tick of the year. They're definitely, I haven't had one this year, but they can be out at this time of year, and they can, if not now, then soon. So some general recommendations is making sure you have all of your clothes tucked in, like socks tucked into pants. Always keep your shirt tucked into your pants as well, and have a belt that keeps it kind of tight. Generally limiting the amount of exposed skin that you have outside of your clothing. As long as you're covered up, you shouldn't have too many issues, but also a tick check after any time you spend in the preserves, especially if you're walking off trail, is a good idea.
Great. We had another fun question. What is the rarest seed you collect in Cook County?
Wow. That's a great question. And it depends a lot on the year. So like those seeds that are adapted to fire, sometimes you'll see a really amassed seed event from a certain species that you haven't seen in years. Last year in the northwest part of the county, and I remember hearing from other volunteers throughout the county, it was a fantastic year for gentian. So the fringed gentian, or no, I didn't mention the fringed gentian today, but that's a rarer species, and the prairie gentian is less common. So I did have the opportunity to collect prairie gentian and fringed gentian last year, which is probably more among some of the rarer plants, but folks definitely collect from orchids and from plants that are hard to find, but definitely never want to over collect, especially among those rarer plants. Never taking more than 10% of the seed and making sure the natural population and the wild population is there to replace itself.
Great, thank you. And we just have 1 minute left, so we're gonna conclude the webinar with a few last notes. But like we said before, Peter will definitely be reaching out to everyone that had questions and answer them via email. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope we're able to see you sometime out in the field soon. But in the meantime, we will keep in touch via email, social media, and our website, fotfp.org, and with more webinars. And if we did not get to your question today, like I said, we will follow up. Please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions or ideas you may have. And finally, Friends is a membership-based organization. So if you feel inspired to join us as a member or make any donation to support our work, Derek, our North Branch field organizer who has been handling tech stuff, has just been putting a link into the chat. And so you can visit that if it interests you. Thank you and take care.